My grandmother's death turned my family into monsters fighting over money. I'm still processing how quickly my family turned into strangers willing to destroy each other over money. This is the story of how $1 million inheritance transformed loving siblings into enemies, how greed brought out the absolute worst in people I thought I knew, and how I learned that family means nothing when money is on the table. My grandmother Margaret was 87 when she died. She was a force of nature right up until the end. Sharp, funny, stubborn, and extremely wealthy. She'd been married to my grandfather, who'd built a successful manufacturing company in the 1960s. When he died 15 years ago, she inherited everything. The company had been sold years before for a substantial sum, and Grandma had invested wisely. By the time she died, her estate was worth about $3 million, plus a gorgeous house in an upscale neighborhood and a vacation home at the beach. She had 3 children: my mother, Rebecca, age 61, my uncle Thomas, age 58, and my aunt Linda, age 55. Before Grandma died, they seemed like a normal family. They'd get together for holidays, called each other regularly, appeared to get along fine. There were old resentments and sibling dynamics, sure, but nothing that seemed catastrophic. My mother was the eldest and had always been responsible and practical. She worked as a nurse for 40 years, raised me and my 2 siblings in a modest middle-class home, lived within her means. She'd always had a somewhat strained relationship with Grandma because Grandma thought nursing was beneath the family's status, but they were cordial. Uncle Thomas was the middle child and the only son. He'd followed in my grandfather's footsteps and gone into business, though not particularly successfully. He'd had a series of failed ventures, some questionable financial decisions, and was constantly asking Grandma for money. He lived in a big house he couldn't really afford, with his wife Patricia and their 2 spoiled adult children. Aunt Linda was the baby of the family and had always been Grandma's favorite. She'd married wealthy, divorced wealthy, and was living off her settlement plus whatever Grandma gave her. She didn't work and spent most of her time shopping, traveling, and posting about her fabulous life on social media. She had 1 daughter, my cousin Amanda, who was equally entitled. I'm 32, work in education, and was probably Grandma's favorite grandchild because I actually spent time with her. I'd visit her weekly, help with errands, listen to her stories. My siblings and cousins rarely visited unless they needed something. That becomes important later. Grandma's health started declining about a year before she died. She was diagnosed with aggressive cancer and given maybe 18 months. She was remarkably pragmatic about it, got her affairs in order quickly, made sure her will was updated, and her estate planning was solid. She'd always been secretive about her finances. None of her children knew exactly how much she had, though they all knew it was substantial. She'd give them money sometimes when they asked, but never disclose the full picture of her wealth. During her decline, I watched my family's behavior change. Uncle Thomas started visiting more often, always bringing gifts, always trying to prove what a devoted son he was. Aunt Linda was there constantly, playing the role of concerned caretaker, though she mostly just sat around while the actual nurses did the work. My mother visited regularly, but maintained her usual practical distance. The grandchildren started showing up too. Cousins who hadn't visited Grandma in years suddenly remembered they loved her so much. It was transparently about positioning themselves for the inheritance, and it made me sick to watch. Grandma saw through all of it. She'd make little comments to me about the sudden attention, about people finally remembering she existed now that she was dying. She was bitter about it, but not surprised. Grandma died on a Tuesday in March. The funeral was the following Saturday, and it was a circus. Everyone crying and making speeches about how much they loved her, how devastating this loss was, what an amazing woman she'd been. I was one of the few people actually grieving. Everyone else was performing grief while calculating their inheritance in their heads. The will reading was scheduled for the week after the funeral. Grandma's lawyer, a stern woman named Miss Chen, who'd worked with Grandma for 30 years, gathered the family at her office. My mother, Uncle Thomas, and Aunt Linda were there as the primary beneficiaries. The grandchildren were allowed to attend since some of us were mentioned in the will. Miss Chen read through the preliminaries, then got to the actual distribution of assets. This is where everything went wrong. Grandma had divided her estate into 4 parts, not 3, 25% to each of her 3 children and 25% to me directly. She'd also left me her main house, while the beach house would be sold and proceeds divided among her children. Her jewelry was to be distributed, with specific pieces going to specific people, and she'd left detailed instructions about that. The reasoning in her will was clear. She appreciated that I'd spent time with her when others hadn't, that I'd cared about her as a person, not just as a source of money, that I'd been there for her during her decline, when most of the family couldn't be bothered unless they were performing for inheritance purposes. The room went silent as Miss Chen finished reading. Then, everything exploded. Aunt Linda started screaming immediately that this was outrageous, that I'd manipulated Grandma, that I'd stolen from the family. Uncle Thomas joined in, saying there was no way Grandma was in her right mind when she made these decisions. My mother was quieter, but I could see she was furious too. My cousins were staring at me with pure hatred. Amanda literally said I was a conniving witch who'd taken advantage of an old woman. My uncle's kids started talking about contesting the will immediately. I was in shock. I'd had no idea Grandma was leaving me anything substantial. I'd spent time with her because I loved her, not because I was angling for money. But no one believed that. They'd all been calculating and manipulating, so they assumed I had too. Miss Chen shut down the yelling and explained that Grandma had been evaluated by multiple doctors who'd confirmed her mental competency when the will was updated. The will was airtight. They could contest it if they wanted, but they'd lose and waste money on legal fees in the process. This did not calm anyone down. Uncle Thomas demanded to see the medical evaluations. Aunt Linda insisted Grandma had been coerced. My mother, in the coldest voice I'd ever heard from her, asked me if I was proud of myself for stealing from my own family. That hurt more than anything. My own mother, who'd raised me, who I'd loved and respected my whole life, immediately assumed the worst of me. I tried to explain that I'd had no idea, that I'd never asked Grandma for anything, that I just wanted to spend time with her. No one was listening. They'd already decided I was the villain. Within days of the will reading, the family battle lines were drawn. Uncle Thomas, Aunt Linda, and my mother formed an alliance against me. My siblings sided with my mother, though they seemed uncomfortable about it. My cousins were fully on board with destroying me. The first shot fired was Uncle Thomas hiring a lawyer to contest the will. He filed claiming undue influence and lack of mental capacity. Aunt Linda joined the suit. My mother didn't officially join, but made it clear she supported them. Miss Chen had warned me this might happen and had referred me to an estate litigation attorney. I hired him immediately. He reviewed everything and confirmed what Miss Chen had said. The will was solid, Grandma had been evaluated and deemed competent, and there was extensive documentation of her wishes. But the legal challenge meant everything was frozen. I couldn't access my inheritance or move into the house until the case was resolved. Meanwhile, I had to pay legal fees I couldn't afford on my teacher's salary. While the legal case was proceeding, my family launched a social campaign against me. They told extended family members that I'd manipulated Grandma and stolen their inheritance. They posted on social media about how devastating it was to lose their mother and then be betrayed by a greedy grandchild. They painted themselves as victims and me as a calculating villain. Extended family members started taking sides. Some believed my aunts and uncles. Some stayed neutral. Very few supported me publicly because they didn't want to get involved in the drama. My cousin Amanda started a whisper campaign, suggesting I'd forged documents or bribed doctors. She had no evidence, but that didn't stop her from spreading the rumor. Other cousins chimed in with their own theories about how I'd manipulated Grandma. About 2 months into the legal battle, things got nastier. Someone broke into Grandma's house while it was empty and trashed it. Furniture overturned, holes punched in walls, offensive things written on the mirrors. The police investigated, but never found who did it, though I had strong suspicions it was one of my cousins. My car was keyed in my apartment parking lot. The word thief was scratched into the paint. Again, no proof of who did it, but the timing was suspicious. I started getting threatening messages from unknown numbers. Things like, "You'll get what you deserve," and "Thieves always get caught eventually." I reported them to the police, but they couldn't trace the numbers. My mother stopped speaking to me entirely. My siblings were torn between loyalty to her and loyalty to me, and mostly chose to stay out of it, which felt like choosing her side. I'd never felt more alone. Uncle Thomas started spreading rumors at my workplace, somehow finding out where I taught and calling the school administration to suggest I was being investigated for elder abuse and financial fraud. This was completely false, but it created problems for me at work. I had to meet with my principal and HR to explain the situation. Aunt Linda took a different approach. She started posting on social media about how family meant everything and how betrayal from within hurt the most. She never mentioned me by name, but made it clear who she was talking about. Her friends and followers would comment with supportive messages about cutting toxic people out of your life. The psychological warfare was exhausting. I was fighting a legal battle I couldn't afford while also being attacked from all sides by people who were supposed to love me. While the main estate was frozen pending litigation, there were some assets that weren't directly contested, specifically Grandma's jewelry and personal effects that had been left to specific people. Grandma had left detailed instructions about her jewelry. She had some extremely valuable pieces, including her engagement ring, which was a 3-carat diamond, plus various other rings, necklaces, and bracelets accumulated over her lifetime. The will specified exactly who got what. I was supposed to receive her engagement ring and her pearl necklace, both of which had tremendous sentimental value to me beyond their monetary worth. My mother was supposed to get several other pieces. Aunt Linda and Amanda were also allocated specific items. Miss Chen had the jewelry in her office safe and was supposed to distribute it according to the will. But before she could, Aunt Linda showed up at Grandma's house with a locksmith and got inside, claiming she needed to retrieve some personal items. By the time anyone found out, most of the jewelry was gone. Aunt Linda claimed she'd taken the jewelry to keep it safe during the legal proceedings, that she'd return everything once the estate was settled, but she refused to specify what she'd taken or prove she had it all. I was furious and got my lawyer involved. He filed a motion to compel Aunt Linda to return the jewelry to Miss Chen's possession. Aunt Linda's lawyer argued she had every right to secure family assets during the litigation. This turned into its own legal battle within the larger legal battle. Meanwhile, I had no idea if I'd ever see Grandma's engagement ring again. That ring meant everything to me. Grandma had told me stories about when Grandpa proposed, about wearing it through decades of marriage, about wanting me to have it someday. The thought of Aunt Linda selling it or keeping it out of spite made me feel physically ill. About 4 months into this nightmare, my mother did something that hurt worse than anything else. She gave an interview to a local news reporter doing a story about elder abuse and inheritance manipulation. She didn't name me directly, but described a situation that was clearly ours, talking about how a young relative had isolated an elderly woman and manipulated her into changing her will. The story aired on the local news and was picked up by a few other outlets. While I wasn't named, people in our community knew who the story was about. I was recognized at the grocery store, at restaurants, at school events. People would stare and whisper. My principal called me in again, concerned about the negative attention being drawn to the school. I had to provide him with documentation proving the abuse allegations were false and part of a disputed inheritance case. I called my mother after the story aired, breaking months of silence between us. I asked her how she could do this to me, how she could publicly accuse me of elder abuse when she knew it wasn't true. She said she didn't know it wasn't true, that maybe I had manipulated Grandma and just didn't want to admit it, that the mother she knew wouldn't have cut her children's inheritance to give extra to a grandchild unless something improper had happened. I realized then that she genuinely believed I'd done something wrong, or at least she'd convinced herself to believe it because it was easier than accepting that her mother had chosen to give me more because I'd actually cared about her. I told her she was dead to me and hung up. We haven't spoken since. The dirty tricks. As the legal case dragged on, both sides engaged in increasingly petty and nasty tactics. Uncle Thomas hired a private investigator to follow me, presumably hoping to find something scandalous to use against me. The PI was obvious and intrusive, showing up at my apartment, my workplace, following my car. I got a restraining order, but it didn't stop completely. Someone filed a false report with Adult Protective Services claiming I'd abused Grandma before her death. APS had to investigate, which meant interviews and home visits and intrusive questions. They quickly determined the report was false and closed the case, but it was humiliating and stressful. My cousin Amanda created a fake social media account pretending to be me and posted terrible things designed to make me look bad. She posted racist and offensive content, pretended to brag about stealing from Grandma, and generally tried to destroy my reputation. I eventually proved the account was fake and got it taken down, but not before screenshots had been spread around. Aunt Linda started calling my friends and claiming I'd borrowed money from Grandma and never paid it back. Completely false, but some friends believed her and started questioning me about it. I wasn't innocent in the battle either. I hired my own investigator to document Uncle Thomas's financial situation, knowing he'd been asking Grandma for money for years. We found he owed her over $100,000 in loans that were never repaid. I submitted this to the court as evidence of who had actually been taking advantage of Grandma financially. I also found out that Aunt Linda had stolen money from Grandma's bank account in the months before her death, using power of attorney access to write herself checks. I reported this to the police and it became a criminal investigation, though ultimately nothing came of it because the DA said it was a civil matter for the estate to handle. Every piece of dirty laundry got aired. Uncle Thomas's failed businesses and debt, Aunt Linda's spending problems, my mother's resentment of Grandma dating back to childhood. The family dynamics that had been hidden for years were now on full display in legal documents. The mediation attempt. About 8 months into the legal battle, the judge ordered mediation before taking the case to trial. Both sides had to sit in a room with a mediator and try to reach a settlement. The mediation was brutal. We sat in a conference room, me and my lawyer on one side, Uncle Thomas, Aunt Linda, my mother, and their lawyers on the other. The mediator tried to get us to have a productive conversation about resolving the dispute. It quickly devolved into yelling. Aunt Linda screaming that I was a thief, Uncle Thomas demanding I give back what I'd stolen, my mother crying about how she'd destroyed the family. I stayed calm, which seemed to make them angrier. I explained that I'd done nothing wrong, that I'd simply had a relationship with Grandma that they hadn't bothered to cultivate, and that wasn't my fault. Uncle Thomas said I'd deliberately excluded them from Grandma to manipulate her. I pointed out that they'd all had the same opportunity to visit Grandma that I did. They just chose not to. Aunt Linda claimed I'd poisoned Grandma against her own children. I said maybe Grandma just saw them clearly, people who only cared about her money and not about her as a person. That comment made Aunt Linda lunge at me across the table. Her lawyer had to physically hold her back. The mediator called a break. During the break, my lawyer told me the other side had a settlement offer. They'd agreed to drop the will contest if I'd give up the house and reduce my inheritance share from 25% to 10%. I'd still get more than the other grandchildren, but less than my mother and her siblings. I refused immediately. Grandma had left me what she wanted me to have. I wasn't going to let them bully me into giving it up.
The mediation resumed, and my lawyer presented a counteroffer. I'd keep everything Grandma left me per the will, but I'd forgive the $100,000 in loans Uncle Thomas owed the estate, and I wouldn't pursue criminal charges related to Aunt Linda's theft from Grandma's accounts. They'd have to return all of Grandma's jewelry and stop all harassment and defamation. They rejected it, said they'd see me in court. The mediation ended with nothing resolved. As we prepared for trial, more ugly truths came out during discovery. Uncle Thomas had been planning to put Grandma in a nursing home against her wishes so he could sell her house and access her money. There were emails discussing this with Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda had been stealing from Grandma for years, not just the bank account theft I'd already discovered. Small amounts that Grandma probably hadn't noticed, but adding up to tens of thousands over time. My mother had apparently been complaining to her siblings for years about how Grandma favored Linda over her, and about how she deserved more inheritance because she'd been such a dutiful daughter, despite Grandma's coldness toward her. All three of them had discussed among themselves how they'd split Grandma's estate before she died, assuming it would be 3 ways evenly. They'd already spent their hypothetical inheritance in their minds. Finding out a quarter of it was going to me had destroyed their plans. On my side, the evidence was clear. I'd visited Grandma weekly for years. I'd helped her with errands, appointments, household tasks. I'd spent time with her not because I wanted something, but because I genuinely enjoyed her company. I had cards and letters she'd written me talking about how much my visits meant to her. I had documentation that I'd never asked her for money, never borrowed from her, never tried to influence her financial decisions. Multiple witnesses could testify that I'd been a devoted grandchild while others had been largely absent. My lawyer was confident we'd win, but trials are unpredictable, and even if we won, my family would be destroyed beyond repair. 2 weeks before trial was scheduled to begin, the other side blinked. Their lawyers had apparently made clear that they were going to lose, that the will was solid, and that going to trial would just mean more legal fees with no change in outcome. They came back with a new settlement offer. They'd drop the will contest and accept the distribution as written. In exchange, I'd agree not to pursue any criminal charges against Aunt Linda, would forgive Uncle Thomas's loans to Grandma, and would agree to never speak publicly about the case or family matters. It also included a provision that the beach house would be sold immediately and proceeds distributed according to the will, rather than it remaining in limbo, and all jewelry had to be returned within 30 days. I didn't want to settle. Part of me wanted to go to trial, to win definitively, to have a court validate that I'd done nothing wrong. But my lawyer advised me that settlement was smarter. Trials are expensive and emotionally draining. I'd already been through almost a year of hell. Taking the settlement meant I could access my inheritance, move into Grandma's house, and start rebuilding my life. I agreed to the settlement with one addition, that my mother, Uncle Thomas, and Aunt Linda had to sign a no-contact agreement. They couldn't contact me directly or indirectly, couldn't come to my home or workplace, couldn't post about me on social media. Violation would result in financial penalties. They agreed. We all signed. After 11 months of legal warfare, it was over. I moved into Grandma's house 2 months after the settlement. It felt strange at first, living in her space, surrounded by her things, but I came to love it. The house was beautiful and in a great neighborhood. More house than I needed as a single person, but I wasn't going to give it up. My inheritance, after legal fees, was still substantial. Enough to pay off my student loans, make some improvements to the house, and invest the rest for my future. I'd never have to worry about money the way I had before. But the cost was everything. My relationship with my mother was destroyed. My siblings were distant, uncomfortable being caught between me and our mother. My aunts, uncle, and cousins were dead to me, and I to them. Extended family mostly avoided me. I'd become the person who broke up the family, regardless of the fact that I'd done nothing wrong. People who wanted to maintain relationships with both sides simply excluded me from events rather than navigate the awkwardness. I was wealthy and alone, living in a beautiful house that felt empty, surrounded by things that reminded me of a grandmother I missed and a family I'd lost. Per the settlement agreement, Aunt Linda had to return all of Grandma's jewelry within 30 days. She tried to delay and make excuses, but Miss Chen was firm. Return it all or face financial penalties and possible criminal charges. Aunt Linda finally turned over a box of jewelry, but when Miss Chen inventoried it, several pieces were missing, including Grandma's engagement ring. I immediately filed a complaint that Aunt Linda had violated the settlement agreement. Her lawyer claimed she'd returned everything she had, that other family members must have taken items before she secured the collection. This started a whole new legal fight. My lawyer filed motions, Aunt Linda's lawyer pushed back. Meanwhile, I had no engagement ring and no way to prove she'd taken it. Eventually, 6 months after the settlement, the engagement ring mysteriously appeared. Amanda, Aunt Linda's daughter, claimed she'd found it in some of her own jewelry and had no idea how it got there. Obviously, this was a lie. Aunt Linda had given it to her daughter, and they were returning it now that legal pressure was mounting. The ring had been resized to fit Amanda's finger. There were scratches on it that hadn't been there before, but at least I had it back. I took it to a jeweler to have it restored and resized to fit me. Every time I look at it now, I think about Grandma and also about the family battle that nearly cost me this precious memento. It's been 2 years since Grandma died and almost a year and a half since the settlement. I'm still processing everything that happened. I've had a lot of therapy to work through the trauma of the family battle. The betrayal by my mother especially still hurts. I have dreams sometimes where we reconcile, where she apologizes and we rebuild our relationship. But I know that won't happen. She's chosen her position and is sticking to it. My siblings reach out occasionally, awkward texts on birthdays or holidays. I respond politely, but we're not close anymore. They sided with our mother when it mattered, and I can't forget that. I've made peace with having essentially no family. I've built a chosen family of close friends who've supported me through this nightmare. I date occasionally, but I'm wary of relationships after seeing how quickly love can turn to hatred when money is involved. The house has become my sanctuary. I've redecorated it to my taste while keeping some of Grandma's favorite things. I think she'd be happy knowing I'm here, taking care of the home she loved. Financially, I'm secure in ways I never imagined I'd be. The inheritance has been invested wisely and continues to grow. I could quit teaching if I wanted to, but I love my job and the kids I work with. The money is just security, not a replacement for purpose. This experience taught me dark lessons about human nature and family dynamics. First, money changes people in ways you can't predict. My mother, aunts, and uncle weren't evil people before Grandma died. They were normal, flawed humans. But the possibility of inheriting substantial wealth turned them into people I didn't recognize. Greed overrode decades of family bonds and turned them into enemies. Second, people will believe what they want to believe. My family wanted to believe I'd manipulated Grandma because that was easier than accepting that maybe they'd been bad children and grandchildren. They created a narrative where I was the villain because it made them feel better about themselves. Third, being right doesn't protect you from consequences. I did nothing wrong. The courts agreed. But I still lost my family, still endured a year of hell, still carry emotional scars. Justice exists, but it doesn't prevent damage. Fourth, family is fragile. I thought blood ties meant something. That shared history and childhood memories would count for something when things got hard. I was wrong. Family turned on me faster than strangers would have. Fifth, you learn who people really are in crisis. Some friends stuck by me when family didn't. Some distant relatives reached out with support while close family attacked me. Crisis reveals character, and sometimes what it reveals is ugly. I think sometimes about what I could have done differently. If I'd known what Grandma was planning, could I have talked her out of leaving me so much? Would that have prevented the family war? But then I remember why she left me what she did. Not because I'd asked or manipulated, but because I genuinely cared about her. Because I'd showed up. Because I'd loved her for who she was and not what she could give me. If I'd rejected the inheritance, given it all to my mother and her siblings to keep the peace, would that have fixed anything? Probably not. They'd already shown who they were. And I'd be giving up what Grandma wanted me to have, betraying her wishes to appease people who'd proven they didn't deserve it. I sometimes wonder what Grandma would think about how everything unfolded. Part of me thinks she knew exactly what would happen, that she'd seen her children's greed and selfishness, that she'd left me the inheritance knowing it would cause a fight, but also knowing I deserved it and they didn't. She'd told me once near the end that family wasn't always about blood, that sometimes the people who weren't related to you were more family than the people who were. I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I do now. Today, I'm 34. I live in Grandma's house, which I think of as my house. I've got a good job, good friends, and financial security I never expected to have. On paper, I'm living a great life. But I'm also alone in ways that hurt. No mother, no siblings really, no extended family to speak of. Holidays are quiet. I don't have family traditions or big gatherings. It's just me. Sometimes I see my mother around town.
We live in the same city, and it's inevitable. We make eye contact and then look away. Once, about 6 months ago, I thought I saw her start to approach me in a grocery store, but she changed her mind and went down a different aisle. I wonder if she has regrets, if she misses me, if she ever thinks about the daughter she lost because she chose to believe the worst about me, but I'll probably never know. Uncle Thomas declared bankruptcy last year. His financial problems finally caught up with him. Part of me felt vindicated. He'd fought so hard for an inheritance he'd have just wasted anyway. Part of me felt sad that it had come to that. Aunt Linda still posts on social media about her fabulous life, though I've heard through mutual acquaintances that she's not as financially secure as she pretends. Amanda got married and had a baby. I saw the photos online before I blocked her. I'm an aunt now, sort of, to a baby I'll never meet. Life goes on, with or without family. I'm building a good life, but there's an emptiness that nothing quite fills. A sadness about what could have been if people had just been better, if greed hadn't poisoned everything. People ask me sometimes if the inheritance was worth it. Worth losing my family? Worth the year of legal hell? Worth the emotional trauma that I'm still processing? Honestly, I don't know how to answer that. The money is nice. The security is nice. Living in this beautiful house is nice. But none of it fills the hole left by losing my mother and siblings. If I could go back, knowing what I know now, what would I do? I still don't know. Accept Grandma's gift and fight the same battle? Or refuse it and try to keep the peace? There's no good answer. What I do know is that I didn't cause this. I didn't ask Grandma to leave me more. I didn't manipulate or scheme. I just loved my grandmother and spent time with her. That's all. The fact that doing the right thing cost me everything says more about my family than it does about me. They could have been happy for me. They could have understood why Grandma made the choices she did. They could have grieved together and stayed family despite the will. Instead, they chose greed. They chose resentment. They chose to destroy family bonds over money. That was their choice, not mine. So I live with the consequences of their choices and my grandmother's choices, and my choice to fight for what she wanted me to have. I live in a beautiful house filled with memories, surrounded by things that belonged to a woman who loved me enough to give me security, even though she knew it would cost me the rest of my family. Some days I think she made the right choice. Some days I wish she'd just split everything evenly and saved me the pain. Most days I just miss her and wish I could ask her what she'd been thinking, what she'd want me to do now. But she's gone. The family is destroyed. The money is mine. And I'm left trying to build a life from what remains, wondering if inheritance is ever worth the cost of family, and knowing that for my mother and her siblings, the answer was clearly yes. They just didn't win the prize they'd been fighting for. I did. And I'm still not sure if that makes me the winner or if we all lost. Did this story get to you? Leave a like and subscribe. More true stories are coming soon.